What's up guys, I'm Dave Klein, and welcome back to my Dark Souls lore series. With the release of Dark Souls Remastered, I thought it would be fun to go through the timeline of major events in Dark Souls, starting from the very beginning. There will be spoilers in order to properly explain everything, as well as some things from Dark Souls 3 we now know.
In the age of ancients, the world was unformed, shrouded by fog.
In the beginning, all that existed was an unchanging existence. Grey crags and arch trees made up the land, along with everlasting dragons. And while we get very little about the Age of Ancients, I like to think of it as an existing planet, mostly devoid of life, devoid of conflict, and devoid of death. Similar to how the Age of Dark is described as tranquil and peaceful, but then there was fire.
And with fire came disparity. Heat and cold, life and death, and of course, light and dark.
Similar to the sun and earth, the Great Fire came and brought with it all of its differences, and while the timeline isn't fully clear, I think a lot actually happened between this point and the point in which we eventually see the Lords finding their various Lord Souls. Again, similar to an analogy between the sun and earth, life isn't instantaneous, but rather a process, and it seems during this process there were multiple primitive races that came about. Those who found the Lord Souls within the flame were, of course,
Nito, the first of the dead. The Witch of Izalith and her daughters of Chaos. Gwyn, the Lord of Sunlight and his faithful knights. And the furtive pygmy, so easily forgotten.
Gwyn, who found a Lord Soul of Light, the Witch of Izalith, a Lord Soul of Life, Nito, a Lord Soul of Death, and the furtive pygmy, the Dark Soul itself. The Witch of Izalith, at the point of finding her Lord Souls, already had 7 Daughters of Chaos. Gwyn, similarly, also already had a legion of knights. Not only that, but we know he wasn't the first of his kind, as according to the White Seance ring, he has an uncle, Allfather Lloyd. So it's possible that Lloyd was the first of the race that Lord Gwyn stems from, as his title would imply he's the father of all. The gold coins men use outside of Lordran depicts Allfather Lloyd and his white halo shown on its face, and is the highest value of outside currency we find in Dark Souls 1. However, in Dark Souls 3 we get that this is a contested fact. Much time has passed since the worship of Lloyd was common in the Way of White. The clerics of Karim had always strongly asserted that Lloyd was a derivative fraud, and that the Allfather title was self-proclaimed. Not only that, but just in being Gwyn's uncle, it's implied he has a sibling, and that would automatically contest Lloyd as truly the father of all. That said, it's probably more meant as a title as opposed to literal, as he's the head of the Way of White, which we'll come back to. The point stands, Gwyn isn't the first of his kind. Nito is the first of the dead, and unlike other races, seems to actually be the first of his kind, with it likely the Lord Soul gave a kind of life to his previously dead body. And finally, the furtive pygmy seems to be the least advanced race, which may be in part why it was forgotten, or at least forgotten to the history of the world. After finding the Lord Souls, Gwyn, Nito, and the Witch of Izalith challenged the dragons for dominion over the earth, beginning a great war. As we see in the intro cinematic, the various lords and their followers seem to be confined to caves, whereas the dragons rule outside in areas resembling Ash Lake. And so, when Gwyn, Nito, and the Witch of Izalith found their Lord Souls, they decided to band together and challenge the dragons. While the intro showcases this as being a fairly short and decisive battle, I believe the war actually took a much longer amount of time, with the many developments taking place specifically under the rule of Gwyn.
The dragons shall never be forgotten. We knights fought valiantly, but for every one of them, we lost 70 of our own. Exhilaration, pride, hatred, rage. The dragons teased out our dearest emotions.
While Gwyn used the power of light to slay dragons, his knights fought alongside him, and throughout the war developed dragon-slaying weapons, such as the Dragon Slayer Greatbow, with the best becoming renowned leaders.
Dragon slaying. Knighthood's highest calling.
One such leader was Hawkeye Goff. He became the leader of the famed Dragon Slayers, who would shoot down the high-flying dragons so that others could then attack them from the ground. Then, to attack the down beast came another great knight who served Gwyn, Dragon Slayer Ornstein, who would bury his Dragon Slayer spear into a dragon's hide. He killed so many dragons, we can later spot dragon heads mounted on a wall of Anor Londo, which were likely attributed to him. In fact, Ornstein was so skilled at slaying dragons, it's possible he was the leader of Gwyn's 4 knights. His armor tells us that Ornstein is believed to be the captain of the 4 knights, so it's possible he isn't, but either way, he was highly regarded. These 4 knights of Gwyn were his greatest warriors, and likely all participated in the war against the dragons and were granted rings by Gwyn to indicate their rank. These knights consisted of Ornstein, the Leo, Hawkeye Goff, the Hawk, Artorias, the Wolf, and Kieran the Hornet. It's unclear how Artorias and Kieran contributed to the war against the dragons, and it is possible they became a part of the 4 knights later on through their own specialties. Fighting alongside Gwyn and his knights, as we now know thanks to Dark Souls 3, was also Gwyn's eldest son, the Nameless King. The Nameless King was one of the greatest assets fighting against the dragons, being dubbed a god of war and a deific hunter of dragons. His Dragon Slayer sword spear was a dragon hunting weapon from the Age of Gods, the earliest form of the cross spear serving as both a sword and a spear. Ornstein also uses a cross spear, and it's likely the design came from the Nameless King's weapon of choice. But while the Nameless King did serve his father, Gwyn, for a large amount of time waging war on the dragons, this would eventually change, as the Nameless King was once a dragon-slaying god of war before he sacrificed everything to ally himself with the ancient dragons. Once a slayer of dragons, the former king and war god tamed a Stormdrake, on which he led a lifetime of battle. After befriending the Stormdrake, the Nameless King betrayed his father Gwyn and switched sides, causing all of his deeds and statues built in his honor to be rescinded. Lord Gwyn's firstborn was a god of war, but his foolishness led to a loss of the annals and rescinding of his deific status. Today, even his name is not known. Although, he wouldn't be the only major player to change sides during the war. While Gwyn and his knights used lightning, arrows, and spears to take down the dragons, the Witch of Izalith and her daughters cast firestorms on the dragons, destroying their homes, and Nito unleashed a miasma of death and disease, tearing apart the remains. Finally came Seath the Scaleless, who betrayed the dragons, joining the side of Gwyn and earning the title of Duke for doing so. It's not clear why precisely Seath decided to betray his own kind, but we do know that unlike the other dragons, Seath lacked immortality, so it could have been out of jealousy. Either that, or was linked to the primordial crystal, which he used to gain immortality.
It is an effect of the primordial crystal, a sacred treasure pillaged by Seath when he turned upon the ancient dragons.
As to how Seath contributed in the war, according to the Moonlight Greatsword, Seath is the grandfather of sorcery, and we see that further in the Crystal Ember, which was created by Seath the Scaleless, and allows for the highest crystal weapon ascension, with crystal attacks being the most powerful forms of sorcery. Not only that, but the large magic ember can be found in Seath's study after defeating Seath. And according to one of the least powerful spells in the game, Soul Arrow inflicts magic damage, making them effective against iron armor, tough scales, and other physically resilient materials, with tough scales being the key word in this. If Soul Arrow is effective against tough scales, it's strongly likely that Seath's crystal magic was highly effective.
And Seath the Scaleless betrayed his own, and the dragons were no more. Thus began the Age of Fire.
After defeating the dragons and winning over the lands, Gwyn and the other lords began their dominion in Lordran. Gwyn built a great city for the gods far, far above the ancient arch trees of the dragons and dubbed it Anorlando, where both giants and human-sized people alike could traverse. The Witch of Izalith and her Daughters of Chaos built their city underground, naming it Izalith. And finally, Nito reigned over the catacombs of Lordran, where the dead would eventually end up. For helping him win the war against the dragons, Gwyn named his 4 knights and bequeathed upon them a fraction of his great lord soul as a gift. Lord Gwyn granted this soul to his 4 most trusted knights. These knights were sent to hunt down the remaining dragons. Not only this, but Gwyn also gave Seath a fraction of his lord soul as thanks for betraying the dragons. Seath was rewarded with dukedom and given an archive where he was free to research magic at his behest. Seath was so talented in sorceries, the land of Vinheim set up a Vinheim Dragon School where sorceries were taught, all seeming to be derivative of Seath's studies and very likely named after him. While Seath influenced the land of Vinheim, an entire religion was built around Gwyn, and in particular prospered in Thurland. All-Father Lloyd's apostles became the head bishop of the Way of White, and the head bishop of the Way of White is the guardian of law and caste and one of the great royals of Thorland. With Anorlando prospering, another city, New Londo, was built into the mountains for humans of all kinds and maintained a robust culture. This was built far below Anorlando with a route to it and was likely meant as a secondary city where those not worthy of Anorlando could live and look up at Anorlando in reverence. Lord Gwyn recognized the foresight of 4 great leaders of New Londo and granted them their ranks and the fragments of a great soul. These leaders were the 4 kings who would rule over New Londo as Gwyn had deemed them worthy. Finally, there was yet another secret city that was founded by Gwyn, the Ringed City. It's not clear exactly when this city was built, and I think it may have been a little later on, but it was built for the pygmies who took the Dark Soul. It's my personal thoughts that the city was gifted to the pygmies a little further down the line. During Gwyn's reign, he had multiple children, but with only 2 known. His firstborn, who likely was born before the Age of Fire and stripped of his annals around this time, and Guinevere, who was a daughter of Lord Gwyn and the Princess of Sunlight, who was cherished by all. He also had a youngest son, and as evidenced by Dark Souls 3, possibly other daughters, none of whom are known. Gwyndolin is the most prevalent and the only one relevant to Dark Souls 1. Unlike the firstborn in Guinevere, Gwyndolin is the Dark Moon deity and lastborn of Gwyn, Lord of Sunlight. The power of the moon was strong in Gwyndolin, and thus he was raised as a daughter. It seems throughout his life, Gwyndolin fought for the adoration of Gwyn, but was shunned to the shadows. Meanwhile, the next 2 come from Dark Souls 3. There's Yorshka, who references Gwyndolin as her brother.
The Dark Moon Knights were once led by my elder brother, the Dark Sun Gwyndolin. But he was stricken by illness, and leadership of the Knights fell to me.
That said, I don't personally think Gwyn is Yorshka's father, especially as we have an item description that states Gwyndolin was his last-born child, and Yorshka states she's Gwyndolin's younger sister. I think it's either a case of brotherhood by arms, where they were both part of the Dark Moon Knights and she considers Gwyndolin her brother. Gwyndolin may have helped raise her, and thus she has given him this title, or they could be half-siblings with different fathers, but the same mother. In the Ringed City, a location in Dark Souls 3, we meet Filianor, who it's strongly evidenced is another daughter of Gwyn. Filianor, who was sent to the Ringed City by Gwyn, which we'll get to. According to the Small Envoy banner, it was used by envoys of Great Lord Gwyn in the days of yore. For the pygmies, who took the Dark Soul, the Great Lord gifted the Ringed City an isolated place at World's End, and his beloved youngest daughter, promising her that he would come for her when the day came. For a long time, Gwyn and the various gods ruled the lands and prospered, but their reign would eventually be threatened. Like any fire, the first flame's time is finite, and with the fading fire, a new development sprung up amongst humans, carriers of an accursed dark sign. These members of the Dark became accursed undead who could not die and would continue to be brought back until they slowly hollowed out, going insane. Not all were happy with Gwyn's reign, and one of these seems to be the goddess Velka. Her crows are found all over a dark ember, which states occult weapons were used to hunt the gods and are effective against their followers and kin. While it's not clear who was in charge, it's possible she utilized this knowledge to lead a rebellion against Gwyn and the other deities. in an ill-fated plot to destroy the very gods. The followers of the occult once attempted to steal the power of Gravelord Nito, the first of the dead. For more info on Velka and the connection to the occult, I recommend checking out my Dark Souls 1 lore video. While it's not clear how the rebellion was stopped, it was likely thanks to yet another of Gwyn's 4 knights, Kirin. These deadly women shift nimbly between layers of darkness, etching streaks of gold into the night air and planting visions of terror into the minds of their targets, with her dagger laying waste to Lord Gwyn's enemies. As the flame continued to fade, and the lords rule over the lands with it, the Witch of Izalith concocted a plan. The Witch of Izalith attempted to duplicate the first flame from a soul, but instead created a distorted being of chaos and fire. Its power formed a bed of life which would become the source of all demons.
My mother, the Witch of Izalith, was one of the primeval lords. Her power came from the soul that she found near the first flame. She focused this power to light a flame of her own. But she failed to control it. The flame of chaos engulfed Mother and my sisters, and molded them into deformed creatures.
With the newly formed demons and the Witch of Izalith's failure, Gwyn waged war against the demons for control of the land. He sent his noble knights after them, who used their weapons to face chaos demons. We can even see this happening in Dark Souls 3, with Black Knights still continuing to fight the remaining demons of the land. And Gwyn's knights were able to win this war, which is evidenced by just about every demon in Dark Souls being found in the Demon's Runes and Izalith, as well as Quelaag's cut dialogue.
Go back, forbidden be these parts. The realm of the creatures of chaos. They accept their banished fate.
We do see Batwing demons serving Gwyn outside of Anor Londo, and similar to Seath, they may have betrayed the demons and switched sides, or their servitude could have been a condition of losing the war. Their demon spears further evidence this, stating, "The weapon of these chaos demons wandering Anor Londo are different from those of other chaos demons and are imbued with lightning. Lightning being the weapon type of Gwyn and not of chaos." We eventually find an asylum demon guarding the undead asylum, which could similarly have been a condition of the demons losing their war. With the failure of the Life Soul to create a duplicated first flame, the fire only continued to fade, and if Koth is to be trusted, actually mostly did fade.
And soon the flames did fade, and only dark remained. Thus began the Age of Men, the Age of Dark. However, Lord Gwyn trembled at the dark, clinging to his age of fire, and in dire fear of humans, and the Dark Lord who would one day be born amongst them. Lord Gwyn resisted the course of nature.
I honestly bounce back and forth on the timeline of certain events, and I'd love to know what you guys think is the timeline of this era, but as the Batwing demons serve as envoys for various locations, including the Ring City, it seems possible the establishment of the Ring City actually came after the failure of the Witch of Izalith. And in fearing the Dark Souls and humanity, for the pygmies who took the Dark Soul, the Great Lord gifted the Ringed City. We can also find a statue in the Ring City of Gwyn gifting a crown and Chloranthy ring to a pygmy, further sealing this connection. The Ring Knights of the city wear armor of early men that were forged in the abyss and betray a smidgen of life. For this reason, the gods cast a seal of fire upon such armor and those who possess them. Again, not only does this showcase the gods' fear of the dark and the abyss, but that this happened after the start of the abyss, which began to spread around this time. One of the first places this happened was likely the land of Ulusil, given Manus, who has the title Father of the Abyss. However, while I think the spread first started due to Manus, it seems shortly afterwards the abyss also began to spread in New Londo.
Long ago, the four kings were powerful men. Only their hearts were weak. When an evil serpent dangled the art of life drain before them, they were unable to resist and became pawns of evil.
This evil serpent being the primordial serpent Darkstalker Koth.
Ah, if you wish, I shall grant the art of life drain, the legendary power of the Dark Lord. It can preserve your humanity while undead, and cast off the shackles placed upon your brethren.
Koth, who seeks the end of the Age of Fire, and for the rule of an undead who will rule the Age of Dark as a Dark Lord. While Koth's reasoning for this is unknown, the four kings accept his offer and begin the spread of the abyss in New Londo. When the four kings were seduced by evil, their knights became dark wraiths, servants of the dark. These dark wraiths then began to wreak havoc on the citizens of New Londo, stealing their humanity. The dark wraiths, incited by Koth, used the power of the dark soul to absorb humanity. With the abyss spreading, another one of Gwyn's four knights was sent out to stop the spread, the Knight Artorias. Sir Artorias hunted the dark wraiths, and his sword strikes harder against dark servants.
According to legend, the Knight Artorias crossed the abyss and annihilated the atrocious dark wraiths.
Even with Artorias traversing the abyss in order to destroy the dark wraiths, the spread was too much. In order to prevent the abyss and the four kings from spreading their influence beyond New Londo, the various sealers, including Ingward, decided to make a great sacrifice. The sealers flooded New Londo to banish the dark wraiths and the four kings. The agonizing decision was made with the realization that countless lives and the robust culture of the city would be lost. The victims now roamed the ruins as ghosts. And, indeed, the consequences were dire. While Gwyn sent the pygmies to the Ring City, there was one important one who wasn't, and the one who I believe to be the furtive pygmy, as we find it in a cave underneath Ulasil at what appears to be a special burial site. Tempted by Koth, the citizens of Ulasil set loose and I believe tortured the furtive pygmy, causing his fragment of the dark soul to go wild, turning him into Manus and causing the spread of the abyss within Ulasil.
Seduced by a dark serpent or no, they awoke that thing themselves and drove it mad. One's demise is always one's own making.
For the full tale on the furtive pygmy and its relation to Manus, I'd recommend checking out my Dark Souls 1 lore video on that very topic. Either way, Artorias stepped in to stop Manus in the spread of the abyss, but failed.
Soon, I will be consumed by them, by the dark.
A time-traveling undead would end up being the one to complete Artorias' job for him, however, not before Ulasil had been completely destroyed by the spread of the abyss. Eventually, the magic of Ulasil would wear out, and the forest would overtake the once great city, turning it to ruins, and transforming it into the Darkroot Garden and Basin. Something else I think is important to note here is the Way of White. The Way of White is a covenant primarily popular in the land of Thorlin that services Gwyn. We know that the head bishop of the Way of White was an apostle to Allfather Lloyd, uncle to Lord Gwyn. Not only this, but according to Lloyd's talisman, in the outside world, the undead are cursed creatures, and Lloyd's cleric knights are widely praised for their undead hunts. This only further proves Koth's point that Gwyn feared the dark, but there's more to this I find important, and that comes from the Way of White clerics who turn undead.
Undead clerics are given a mission to seek kindling. Kindling is the art of feeding bonfires with humanity. Through kindling, we shall one day be granted magnificent powers.
This brings up something incredibly important to note about humanity. According to an interview with Hidetaka Miyazaki on the Japanese radio show Game no Shokutaku, when asked about the furtive pygmy, Miyazaki responds, "The image is something like a human ancestor. It found the Lord Soul, and humanity is like a fragment of it, kinda like an ancestor, so the descendants have a part of that soul." The humanity sprites themselves tell us that this black sprite is called humanity, but little is known about its true nature. If the soul is the source of all life, then what distinguishes the humanity we hold within ourselves? It's my belief that humanity is that split portion of the Lord's Soul the furtive pygmy found, and therefore all humans have a piece of the Dark Soul within them. This is speculation, but it's my belief that the Covenant was set up in order to trick undead into betraying themselves. If we look at bonfires as a sort of extension of the First Flame, Gwyn's entire Way of White Covenant is essentially set up to hunt undead and then kindle the First Flame with humanity, or pieces of the Dark Soul. The followers are then told that those who do will one day be granted magnificent powers. They're essentially being tricked into extending the Age of Fire with a false promise for power. While it's not clear if these events took place after or before the following event, one thing was clear: the situation was dire, and Gwyn decided to sacrifice himself to preserve his Age of Fire. Lord Gwyn, bearer of the ultimate soul, divided that power among his clan before linking the flame. Gwyn linked the fire, giving himself and his soul up as kindling for the first flame in order to extend his age.
Lord Gwyn resisted the course of nature by sacrificing himself to link the fire and commanding his children to shepherd the humans.
With Gwyn gone in a tumbling age of fire, Lordran slowly dilapidated over time. At one point, an undead settlement arose, with the cursed humans turning undead, creating their own town, only for them to slowly go hollow over time, with the city falling to ruin. Seath began experimenting on everything he could, including Princess Guinevere's handmaidens. He set out Chandlers, the Snatchers as they were called, who ventured to far lands to find suitable human specimens. However, Seath's quest for knowledge eventually turned him mad, with his magical creations inhabiting his archive. Most of the remaining gods fled from Lordran, including Gwyn's own daughter, Guinevere. The Princess of Sunlight, Guinevere, left Anor Londo along with many other deities, and later became wife to flame god Flann. And with that, Gwyndolin, the only remaining child of Gwyn, set up illusions from the shadows. The Dark Sun Gwyndolin is the only remaining deity in Anor Londo. Gwyndolin creates an illusion of Guinevere and controls this illusion, acting as a shadow ruler of Anor Londo. He also creates an illusion in front of the Dark Moon Tomb, and is very likely every illusory wall within Dark Souls has been created by Gwyndolin in order to prevent the undead from finding certain things. For example, there's an illusory wall blocking access to the Great Hollow and location of Ash Lake, the location of everlasting dragons. Most notably, Gwyndolin casts an illusion over Anor Londo itself. As the fire has been fading, its effects can be felt across the lands, and the true Anor Londo is actually steeped in moonlight. Killing the illusion of Guinevere that Gwyndolin has set up will break this illusion and reveal just how close the first flame is to fading.
Thou that tarnisheth the Godmother's image, I am Gwyndolin. And thy transgression shall not go unpunished. Thou shalt perish in the twilight of Anor Londo.
In the ancient legends it is stated that one day an undead shall be chosen. To leave the undead asylum in pilgrimage to the land of the ancient lords. Lordran.
When the game takes place, Lordran is in a decrepit state, with the Age of Fire near its finality. The undead are viewed as a scourge on the earth, with an asylum built to transport certain undead to. However, a legend exists that is spread throughout the lands, such as that of Astora.
There is an old saying in my family. Thou who art undead art chosen, and thine exodus from the undead asylum maketh pilgrimage to the land of ancient lords. When thou ringeth the bell of awakening, the fate of the undead thou shalt know.
This legend being perpetuated by King Seeker Frampt, who tells the chosen undead who does finally ring the bell of awakening, seemingly meant to test an undead warrior and meant to wake him up,
Chosen undead, your fate is to succeed the great Lord Gwyn, so that you may link the fire, cast away the dark, and undo the curse of the undead. To this end, you must visit Anor Londo and acquire the Lord Vessel.
And in visiting Anor Londo, the chosen undead finds none other than Guinevere. However, is never told that she's actually an illusion. Guinevere tells the chosen undead,
O chosen undead, I am Guinevere, daughter of Lord Gwyn and Queen of Sunlight.
Which, of course, is a straight-up lie.
Since the day Father his form did obscureth, I have awaited thee. I bequeath the Lord Vessel to thee, and beseech thee. Succeed Lord Gwyn, and inheriteth the fire of our world. Thou shalt endeth this eternal twilight, and avert further undead sacrifices.
And if the chosen undead succeeds, the fire completely engulfs them, reigniting the Age of Fire. Similar to the Ring City and the Way of White, the gods have schemed to trick the undead into furthering the Age of Fire, which is good or bad depending on your personal perspective. As Gwyn reveres Gwyndolин's illusion, we can infer that everything coming out of her is actually coming from him. So this legend of the chosen undead seems to be a false creation in order to get the undead to do the god's bidding. That said, it's not fully clear who created the legend of the chosen undead. It could have been Gwyn's idea that he passed on to Kingseeker Frampt and Gwyndolin before he went to reinvigorate the Age of Fire with his own soul. Or it could have been Frampt or Gwyndolin himself who concocted the idea. And there's more to it. In order to even enter into the Kiln of the First Flame, where the chosen undead can unwittingly sacrifice themselves to extend the Age of Fire, they must fill and present a Lord Vessel, which contains the souls of other major lords. And if we look at the souls that this must contain, it includes defeating the Witch of Izalith and obtaining her life soul, defeating Nito and obtaining his death soul, and wiping out both the four kings and Seath who have gained bequeathed souls of Gwyn, and therefore major portions of the light soul.
The beings who possess these souls have outlived their usefulness, or have chosen the path of the wicked. As the primordial serpent, I implore you to defeat them and claim their souls. Let there be no guilt. Let there be no vacillation.
Not only that, but on your journey, the chosen undead will have slain hundreds of other undead, gained humanity, and sacrificed all of the portions of the Dark Soul that they have obtained. In other words, Gwyndolin has schemed for the undead to reclaim every Lord Soul taken from the fire and return it as kindling to extend the God's Age of Fire. And this legend has been going on for a long time, which explains why so many creatures are automatically hostile towards the player, who along with other undead have been repeatedly coming to exterminate them and their gods. And this brings us to the finale of the game. The chosen undead, coming to the First Flame, equipped with the souls of all of the major lords from a dilapidated and dying kingdom. Will you, as the chosen undead, choose to extend the Age of Fire for an extended period of time before the flame will ultimately wither out and die? Or will you allow the flame to die and become the Dark Lord of a new era, the Age of Dark? That wraps up the story and major plot points of Dark Souls 1. For a deeper look into the lore of various characters and bosses, I recommend checking out my Dark Souls lore playlist I'll link to at the end of the video. Also, I highly recommend checking out other lore videos from other members of the Dark Souls community. Many aspects of the story are up for interpretation, and these are my interpretations of the events. Also, I'd love to know your thoughts on the timeline. I did my best to piece it together as best I could, but time is convoluted in Lordran, and some events are hard to place. A huge thank you to everyone who supports me on Patreon. It truly means a lot to me, and I'm blown away by your generosity. Thank you so much to One-Eyed Sniper, Dark Sun Rebel, Aslish, Invidentia, Ryan Drawn, Jason Buck, and of course, everybody else who helps contribute. If you enjoyed this video, consider checking out more of my Soulsborne lore videos covering just about every game in the series. Also, if you have time, check out my comedic retrospective series, The Super Shows. I have videos on multiple Souls games, and just finished one on From Software's first series, King's Field. Thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you guys next time. Peace.